Well, first of all, welcome. And I suppose I'll start like the jolly heretic, Dr. Dutton. Cheers. Last time I drank tea, but it's very hot here. It's 33 degrees today here in Lanzarote. Now, as you know, I make my videos only when there's something that happens that I feel quite strongly about. And I've observed that we're in the midst with this latest row between Patriotic Alternative and Patriotic Talk of the old Eastenders nationalism again. And I know Mark and Laura, they say they don't like the Eastenders nationalism and they want to stay away from the infighting and the drama. But the fact is that a lot of this drama is coming from you, Mark, because there seems to be a long list of people who you suddenly ghost and you want us all to suddenly forget about because you suddenly turn on a pin and decide these people are no good. And it wouldn't matter if it was someone really bad or if it was a very rare occurrence. We might all feel sorry for the guy, but it wouldn't matter in the wider scheme of things. But it's not just one person or just someone who's obviously very bad. I mean, I need a list for all the people Mark Collett has ghosted. I can't even remember them all. First of all, there's Nick Griffin, Vinnie Sullivan, Jim Dowson, Paul Golding, Jada Franson, Millennial Woes, Lucy Brown, Ralph, Unwashed, Dion, Chris, the latest one in Patriotic Talk, and I think also James Goddard, but that's not confirmed. So these may not all be his fault, but it's quite a big list, isn't it? Now, I don't know anyone who's watched my videos before. I'm a bit of a history nerd. And I love history. I did A-level history. I did a degree in history. It's never been of much good to me because I was a history teacher for a year, but I didn't like it because I don't really like rowdy teenagers. So it's never been of any use to me in terms of doing a degree in it. But and also I'd say there's nothing in that degree that I couldn't have learnt myself reading books. But in terms of still reading books and studying it now, that's something that I continue to do. So I like to try and find, for a current situation, a historical analogy. Now, if you look at the Crusades, and the best Crusade book, one of the best I've read, is Stephen Runciman. And he wrote a trilogy of the Crusades, and it was right back in the 50s. But it's relevant today because of the quality of the writing and the quality of the research in it. And I'd say it's one of the best works of written history on medieval times there is. And Mr. Runciman was gay. But this was back in the days when gay people, rather than putting their energy into achieving some sort of victim status and marching around the streets with a rainbow flag trying to impose propaganda on innocent little children, this was back when they did something productive and put their energy and their passion into something worthwhile, rather than just trying to be another victim in the multicultural society. Now, one of the great stories, I've been rereading it, and I'm on the third volume, so it's fairly late in the Crusading movement. And one of the most inspirational characters is King Louis IX, who was later made a saint. Now, he launched a crusade in 1248, and as the Crusades went on, the Crusades realised that the breadbasket of the Muslim Empire was Egypt. So the Fifth Crusade was launched against Egypt, and St. Louis' Crusade, around 40 years later, was also launched against Egypt. Now, what happened? St. Louis's crusade got off to a brilliant start. They took Damietta at the mouth of the Nile, and then he was sensible. He didn't advance down the Nile during the season when it flooded, which was the mistake that I think the Fifth Crusade made. So Louis was being really disciplined and really tactical with his decisions. And then come the end of the flooding season, he went down and advanced down to Mansoura, and in command of the van was his brother, who was called Robert of Artois. Now, what his brother did, he rushed ahead. Now, they went down to this town called Mansoura, and the Muslim camp was just outside. And for about 6 weeks, the Muslim army and the Crusading army looked at each other across this river, and they just sort of wearily eyed each other. Then one day, St. Louis, he had a Muslim turncoat come and offer to sell him for money the location of a ford where the Crusading army could cross the river. And this ford was found, and St. Louis, he took his army and he crossed the river. And Robert of Artois, obviously he was in the van, he was the first troops across the river. Now, because it was only a narrow ford, the whole army could not go across the river very quickly, so it was a slow process. So the king's brother, Robert of Artois, he got across the river, and he had the Knights Templars with him and a small contingent of English under the Earl of Salisbury. And then Robert of Artois, even though Louis had said hang on, he rushed headlong and attacked the Muslim camp. And he was very lucky, because the Muslim camp, they were still half asleep. It was early in the morning, and he scored a stunning victory. And some Knights Templars even killed the vizier, Fakhr al-Din. And but the rest of the Muslim army that did escape, they were rallied by Baybars, a future sultan who was at this point only a Mamluk commander, and they retreated back into the town of Mansoura. Now, Robert of Artois had been told, wait for the rest of the crusading army. Don't go charging off up ahead until the whole army is across the ford. But Robert of Artois was very headstrong, and the Templars who were with him and the English who were with him, they said, hang on, we've been lucky once rushing ahead. We've managed to take this Muslim camp, but it's a different prospect riding it full on into a big city or town like Mansoura. And the fact is, Robert of Artois then turned round, and I think he told, he was determined, he thought he could win the whole crusade himself. And he called the Knights Templars and the English cowards, and he rushed ahead again into the town of Mansoura. And he'd been lucky once taking a risk, but this time he wasn't so lucky. And in the narrow streets of Mansoura, the knights, they couldn't manoeuvre their horses, and they were trapped, and they didn't have the momentum of being able to charge in a confined space in these narrow streets. And so what happened was they were cut down bit by bit, and then they were trapped and they couldn't get out again. And most of the Knights Templars and a lot of the English contingent were killed. And Robert of Artois, he barricaded himself in a house with some of his men, and he was killed as well. And Louis, a few hours later, he got the rest of the army across the ford, and he learnt what had happened, and the momentum had gone from the attack. And the Mamluks, they came out of Mansoura and they attacked Louis, and all Louis was able to do was hold his ground on the side of the river that he crossed to. That's all he was able to do, because obviously he'd lost about a third of his forces with Robert of Artois' headstrong, crazy, brave but stupid charge into Mansoura. And then what happened after that, there was stalemate, and all the Muslims had to do was, harry the supply lines of the Crusader army and wait in the Nile Delta for mosquitoes and germs and flies to spread disease. And soon there was famine and disease in the Christian camp, and Louis's army was weakened bit by bit, and then he wasn't even able to get decent peace terms that he'd been offered, and he had to do an ignominious retreat once the army was weakened by disease and famine, and most of the army was captured, and it cost the king an awful amount in terms of ransom money to free his army. And I think the injured, the Muslims said they wouldn't kill them, but they were killed, because in medieval times it was very brutal. And yes, people were ransomed when they were captured in war, but there was no guarantee. And if circumstances, were changed, or it was difficult for them to feed you, prisoners would just get massacred. And it was only really if you were someone who was really aristocratic or who could fetch a big ransom that you had a good chance of not being killed, because otherwise your best chance was as a slave, and apart from that, you might well be massacred if they ran out of food or they felt there was another attack coming, and the holding prisoners might be a risk. So we have the irony that Louis's first crusade was destroyed by his headstrong brother, Robert of Artois. Well, Louis, he was such a religious man that he went back to France, and he couldn't let it go. He kept pondering on the failure of his first crusade, and in 1270 he launched another one. And his other brother, Charles of Anjou, he was the ruler in Italy, and he'd taken over Italy by fighting the Hohenstaufen German royal family. And the Emir of Tunis had given the remnants of the Hohenstaufen forces sanctuary. So Charles of Anjou, he persuaded Louis, through his own interest, he deceived his religious brother to launch his second crusade against Tunis. And that failed, and there the army was destroyed again by dysentery and illness. But the fact was, the crusade shouldn't have been launched against Tunis. It should have either gone to Egypt or to Outrima, the Holy Land. And Baybars was actually scared of Louis's crusade coming to the Holy Land, but it never did, because Louis was persuaded wrongly by his own brother to launch the crusade in an area where it was useless. And what we have an irony here in history that I think is relevant to us. We've got a king who had the potential and the belief and the conviction to achieve an awful lot. And what happened was, he wasn't defeated by the enemy, he wasn't outwitted by a Muslim general. On both those crusades, he ended up failing because of his own brother. And there might be a lesson there for us today in this movement, that it's not Antifa or the left or the enemy causing this disunity or sowing these seeds of disunion and disharmony. It's us ourselves. It's our own brothers and comrades in the movement. And we need to look at ourselves in a way over these conflicts, because like King Louis, it's not the enemy who we can see in the distance. He could see the Muslim army. It's not them defeating him. It's his own brothers messing things up for him. The people within his own ranks. Now, when we look at these conflicts with Mark and his history, there is a pattern we see, and it was the same thing with Nick Griffin, and there seems to be a pattern of getting quite emotionally involved with people and really investing a lot of emotion and looking up to them, and putting a lot of emotional energy into them, and then the moment they do anything that upsets him, he goes from one extreme of a really strong liking, or almost love type emotion, then he goes straight to the other extreme of hatred, and really nasty, vicious hatred. And the fact is, I remember when there was that court case, and Nick Griffin and Mark Collett were cleared. Mark actually went up to Nick, and he kissed him on the cheek. And since they weren't in The Sopranos, Nick looked a little bit embarrassed, as I think I would. And so in a way, it wasn't just Nick was the leader who he liked. Nick was almost like a second father figure, someone he really, really admired and really put a lot of emotion into, and really looked up to. And then now he's got rushed to the other extreme, and he can't even bear to say the man's name, and he really, really hates him. And it's the same with the Patriotic Talk lad, Chris, and Mark brought him into the movement, and Mark was really sort of nurturing and protective of him. And Chris, not insulting anyone, but he came from the Tommy Robinson sort of football and beer side, and Mark introduced him to the other side of nationalism about learning the background facts and reading the books. And it's not just about going out drinking and having a ruck, it's about learning some of our history to inspire you, and arguments that we need to use to persuade people. And you could see Mark bringing him in and nurturing him, and it went to the extent that when that Tom lad in Australia who goes off the deep end, and I think he's in prison now, and he got himself arrested. He'd been on Patriotic Talk, and he'd said stuff that was really near the mark legally, and really sort of dodgy stuff that could have got the other people on the show into trouble. And Mark, he got really annoyed over it. He was really protective of Chris. That this guy Tom in Australia had got his good little friend, his good little protege into trouble. But now, a couple of months on, again, we've gone from this, utter, almost, I'm not saying this in a gay way, but almost like a love. And now we've gone again all the way to extreme hate. And it's up and down, and it's not a good way for a leader to carry on. Now, we've all done it. We've all got emotionally involved and emotionally invested when we should have maybe took a step back. I mean, we can think of when we were younger, when we fancied girls, and it was the end of the world if they didn't speak to us. And even in terms of being friends with other guys, I remember when I first joined the post office, there was another postman I was really good pals with, and he really admired him. He was an ex-army man, and he was getting married. And because I'd only been in the post office a few months, he didn't invite me. And I remember I was devastated. I was like, oh, I so wanted to go to this guy's wedding, and today I can't even remember his name. I mean, this is, God, 17, 18 years ago. And I think, why was I so bothered? And I think maybe my advice to Mark is, don't put so much emotion in the first place. Be a little bit standoffish, a little bit, you know, less involved, and just think. I mean, a lot of people, I'm like, yeah, I like them, they're nice, but I'm not like that emotionally involved. I'm not like, and he realizes that this is what a leader needs himself. Because when he reviewed the film Master and Commander, he said about how Captain, Aubrey, Jack Aubrey, I think it was. I mean, I've read the books, but not for years. He wasn't friends with the crew. There was a little bit of distance there. There, in order to have that respect, there was a little bit of distance. And I can remember that back when I was an air cadet, the guy in charge of our squadron, we all liked him and respected him, but he wasn't friends with any of us, and I didn't know anything really about him, and because there was that emotional distance, that emotional gap, and if we look at leaders from history, and I know some of the PA gang, like the old Third Reich Larkin, well, here's Heinz Lynch, Hitler's valet, and he says in this book, Heinz Lynch, and there he is walking down the steps with Hitler at Salzburg, and he said in that book, Hitler didn't really have friends. He had old comrades and people he'd worked with, but didn't really have any friends because he was that emotionally distant. And we see this with other leaders like Stalin. I mean, Stalin was all powerful, but he had so few friends that when he had a stroke, he was left on the floor for 10 hours, urinating himself. But the fact is, you don't need to go to that extent, Mark, but maybe it's not good to be getting really emotionally involved to the point that when they let you down or when you disagree with them, you then rush to the other extreme of hatred. Now, if you were a little bit more detached in the first place, this up and down may not happen. And obviously, I like to see both sides of every story. So I watched the Patriotic talk stream, and I listened to Chris and others who Mark has disowned, and Vinnie Sullivan, who a seemingly nice guy who's put himself on the line in terms of facing violence for the movement. And in fairness to them, they said on that stream, if PA do something good, they will still praise PA. And Chris also said, if PA, supporters want to watch him and support him, he's not going to be, oh, if you support me or watch me, you can't be involved with PA. So who's being more cult-like? I mean, my suspicion is it would be Mark who would be, oh, if you're involved with Patriotic Talk, you can't come to my camp. But Chris and Vinnie Sullivan, they're like, well, you can come and talk to us and associate with us and still be involved with PA. Now, who here is behaving in the more mature way? Now, I mean, I've said this to Mark numerous times. I don't know whether he listens. I don't know whether he even wants to listen. There's a few things he needs to do to make PA a serious political party, to make it have any chance of success. And the first thing is flexibility on ideology, like Nick did with the BNP, and don't try and sell the stuff that Euro on absolute state of Britain seems to want to try and sell straight out the 1930s. And as I always say, I've said on my other video, all these hardcore Nazi larpers, they won't show their face. So, you know, people who want to sell sensible nationalism, like me, will show our face. But people who want to say that, oh, certain dead regimes never did anything wrong, they won't show their face. And for the record, I'd have kept Britain neutral in World War II, but also I disagree with certain things that were done and certain actions that were launched by Hitler. So there's a middle way, a sensible way. And I feel a neutral Britain could have mediated to prevent some of the worst excesses and atrocities. Now, PWR, Mark's show, even when it was called This Week on the Alt-Right, which is what it should have stayed, but Mark, with this obsession with middle-class optics, changed the name. It claims to be a weekly summary of all the news in the movement and all what's going on within the wider nationalist movement. And if that's the case, everyone in the movement, Paul Golding, Jada Franson, Nick Griffin, every big name should have an invite on there to come on and debate Mark, even if he personally doesn't like them. And if Mark then turns around to someone like Nick Griffin and says, look, we don't get on, come on, put your points, debate me, we'll be civil and polite to each other, and Griffin then says, no, I won't, who looks the bigger man? Mark, obviously. Now, someone said to me on BitChute, where I debated this a little bit under one of Laura's videos, he said, oh, it's his show, he can have who he likes on, and you're a spoilt brat saying he can't. Well, the fact is, I'm a volunteer, I'm a foot soldier. I don't get paid a penny for nationalism. You know, all the leaflets I've delivered for the BNP, all the meetings I've attended, Traditional Britain, all the arguments I've had online trying to win normies over, I don't get paid a penny for any of it. Now, Mark, I'm not saying he's not in it for the money. He's a true believer, but he's earning a living from this, and he's getting paid. Now, I, as an unpaid foot soldier and volunteer, would be prepared to debate someone I hated if I felt it would progress the movement. Now, I'm prepared to do that, and I'm not getting paid. Surely a leader who's getting paid should be able to put aside personal likes, personal dislikes for the sake of the movement. The second thing that Mark is doing wrong with Patriotic Alternative, he seems to have, and I've said this in other videos, he seems to have this idea that the BNP failed because it didn't appear middle class enough. And this is utter nonsense. And he seems to think that because we met in the back room of the pub, and some people after the meetings, they might have drunk a little bit much and got a bit rowdy, that's why we failed. And because some of the people who came along were a bit rough and ready, hard men with tattoos. And my stance always is everyone should be welcome. If they're a bit eccentric and they're in an old anorak and they print their own news sheet, fine. Like the old Reverend Papworth, I don't know who remembers him. I met him once at a meeting, and I think it was a Conservative Democratic Alliance, and without me asking or requesting, he sent me this news sheet for a year that I never even read or never even was interested in reading, bless him. And then once with a friend of mine, I was going past his house, so we knocked on the door, and I sat down, he invited us in for tea, and I sort of said, oh, well, thanks Reverend Papworth for sending me your news sheet for a year, and that, just trying to be nice. I give him a tenner, and he goes, "That's for a year, is it? That's for a year?" And so I give him another tenner, and he never sent it again. And I didn't have the heart to tell him, look, I never wanted to read. I never read the damn thing in the first place. I think it was called Fourth World Review or something. But it's the old English eccentric that they go around these meetings, or the Tommy Robinson football lad with hard man with the tattoos and the skinhead. Now, my stance always is with these people, if they're not hassling anyone, if they're not upsetting anyone, and obviously words can be had if they do, if they're not picking on anyone or being nasty to anyone, they're welcome. If you have, if Reverend Papworth came up to me offering me, I was quite capable of saying, no, I don't want your bloody magazine, but I'd had a glass of wine and I was in a friendly mood. So, there's no need to be, because these people are a little bit weird, or they look a little bit of a hard man, a little bit threatening, we need to ban them from the meeting. I mean, there was someone on Mark's show, and I think his dog was a bit vicious, and he had it on a lead. And one of Mark's little middle-class meme warriors was letting his dog run about uncontrollably. And this dog off the lead went up to this hard man's dog, which was on a lead, and the hard man shouted to get this dog away or his dog would bite it. And then I think he was banned for being aggressive. Well, who was in the wrong there? The guy who's got a vicious dog who's being responsible, or the little middle-class meme warrior, pal of Mark, who's letting his dog run around everywhere, and then the minute he gets shouted at over it, he's like, goes running to Mark and getting this guy banned. Now, the other part of this, hiding away in the back room of a hotel, is also it becomes a little bit inaccessible, and there's all this fear of doxing amongst all these little pals of Mark's, like the Euro boys, and the accessibility is gone. I mean, I remember the BMP. It used to be back room of a pub, Prince of Wales, and I mean, Nick used to turn up and speak. He had a bouncer there, a few bouncers there with him. I mean, I thought at one point when he was getting big, he thought he was Tony Soprano because he turned up in a big Range Rover. But the fact is, if you knew someone and you could say they're all right, you could bring them along. And if you remember, you knew where the meeting was, you could turn up. Now, I had a friend, Adrian, who was in the Conservative Party, and he was interested. So I was like, well, come along. Come and see what Nick has got to say. Now, he was half Jewish, so I don't know if he agreed with all of it, but he agreed with a lot of it. And the fact is, I was able to say, look, come along, come and see. Now, supposing I was a PA member, and I had someone from the Tory party, someone from UKIP, and I was like, and I went to Alicia, can I just bring them along? I suspect Mark and Laura would be, no, we need to do a check, we need to go around their house, we need to household utility bill, and then the guy's just going to turn around and say, no, not interested. Whereas that person, I mean, I know my friend Adrian, he did vote BNP, so that was a vote I won by bringing this guy along. I don't think he joined, but he voted for him. Now, if you hide away and there's all this vetting and all this meme warriors and all the rest of it, you're losing the accessibility that you've got in the back room of a pub that I had here in a Vox meeting out on the seafront that my other video's about. Now, as I saw Nick Griffin the other day on a stream with Unwashed, and he said, I mean, I know some people have got mortgages, families, and they have to keep their identity secret. But Nick said, in a serious political party, you dox yourself. you're not scared of your identity. I mean, I've been through it. I was discovered as a right winger, and I was a police officer. I mean, and outside work under a false name. In my own time, I criticised police joining gay pride parades, and I clicked like on Britain First and Traditional Britain, and I was suspended for a year on full pay, so I made a bit of money out of them. And then I had a hearing and I was sacked. And I'd always treated all members of the public the same because that was my duty. And I'd never mention my politics at work because, you know, being professional, you go to work, you don't mention your politics. And but it wasn't enough for them because I was a non-liberal within the police ranks. I was sacked. So I've been through doxing. I know it's hard. I know it can be traumatic. I mean, my personal situation, I had people on my police team who signed a card when my mum died, who after I was found out as a secret right winger and in trouble, first of all I'm restricted, then suspended, they refused even to say hello. So yes, it is painful in a way, but you find out who your real friends are. And in the BNP, they you know, if someone had a sensitive job, you know, the regional, their local organiser would just say to them on the sly, look, join under a false name and avoid standing in the photo if we have a photo after some leafleting. So it's perfectly possible to have a bit of security and a bit of cover for those who have got, you know, a risk of losing their job if they're uncovered as right wing, without going to the hysterical extent of we need to come around your house, we need your household bills, all the rest of it. Because if you do that, and some of these young people, they get obsessive about doxing. I mean, I was in a chat for a show, Ralph's show, you know, Ralph Right Reaction. I was in his chat the other week, and I was chatting to Claire Core. Watch her channel, good channel. Again, I don't agree with all what she says, but food for thought. And I was chatting to her about the Swinton Circle, which we both attend. And one of the moderators is like, you're trying to dox people. You're trying to dox people. You're trying to uncover identities. And he blocked me for 5 minutes. And fair enough to this fella. He later on admitted, sorry, I was wrong. Because I said to him, look, my friend, I'm not. The last thing I'd do is try and get people who are my friends in the movement beaten up. But I said, this isn't a secret society. This isn't a mafia. I said, the Swinton Circle is a legitimate political movement. And if you don't have a sensitive job, you should be able to stand up and say, I'm in the Swinton Circle. I'm proud of it. And some of these youngsters, they get a little bit obsessed about doxing. And I think if you're serious about your politics, you've got to be able to come out and show your face. And if people say, oh, I don't like you because you disagree with multiculturalism, you disagree with the LGBT agenda, you're against Islam in Europe, well, if they dislike you because of your opinions, they weren't your real friend anyway. Because it only seems to be the liberals who say someone who disagrees with me is a bad person. I don't say that. I'm quite happy to be friends with someone who's got a different opinion to me. It's the liberals who do this. And if they want to play this game, doesn't bother me. I say, right, you don't want to be my friend because of my opinions, fine, bye-bye. And if you're in this movement, you need to be strong enough to do that. Because you're not really a serious member. All the time you're behind your Waffen SS avatar, being as hardcore as you like, not showing your face. Because, as Nick also said the other day, you can't really trust someone unless you can see their face and know who they are. And if it was the Mad Max, you know, everything fell apart scenario and everyone was on the street and there was disorder and chaos, if the Ayatollah was coming towards me, and it's a great show he does every Friday, I wouldn't know who he was and I wouldn't trust him because I've never seen his face before. And I realise he may have a job that he's got to keep his identity secret for, fair enough. But you've got to admit that someone who does show their face their words will have more of an impact than someone who doesn't. And some of the PA gang, they need to remember this. It's not about hiding away in a little Marriott hotel, all wearing a suit without a Union Jack flag in sight. It's about selling ideas. And if you're not proud enough of those ideas to show your face, there's a weakness there. And the weakness isn't in the lack of middle class optics. The weakness is in your confidence to argue these ideas, and maybe the ideas you want to argue yourself if you want to go down the sort of Nazi LARPing route. Now, Mark he comes, I'd assume, I don't know this for sure, I'd assume his background is maybe more middle class than a lot of people, say Vinnie Sullivan, in the movement. And I'm not criticising him for that. And it's to his eternal credit that he was prepared to give up that middle class lifestyle of company cars, golf clubs, dinner parties, a career, for his principles. I mean, I assume he's middle class because I think he went to a private school and he speaks quite well and he's not got a really strong accent. Now, I myself, I can't claim to be some salt of the earth working class person. I mean, most of the jobs I've done have been working class. My secondary school was just a secondary modern. I've been a school teacher, a history teacher for a year, a postman, a prison officer, and then a policeman. So it's mainly sort of working class type jobs. And I mean, you say about, in terms of class, you say about the jobs that your parents had. Well, my mum was a secretary, and my dad, he worked for the local council as a repairman, and before that he repaired TVs for a company. But they did own their own house, and they paid off that house from inheritance from grandparents and such like when they died, and I now own that house, a house from inheritance, and I rent that out. And because I have really cheap rent down here in Lanzarote, you can live fairly well off that. Because after Brexit and with the coronavirus and no tourists, it's quite hard to find work here at the moment. So I can't claim to be really working class. I'm probably upper working, lower middle class myself. I would assume Laura, I think Laura's from a council estate, so I'd assume she is more working class than me. But sometimes privilege can be a disadvantage, and history nerd Gus, I like to find another example of this. Now, in World War II, there were various people who went over to Germany and did propaganda broadcasts and helped out the Germans. And I think Lord Haw Haw was the most famous. And another famous one was John Amory. And there's a good book about him and Casement, who was a traitor in the First World War, by Adrian Will. And it says how at the end of the Second World War, there were a couple of death sentences of people like Amory who'd gone over to help the Germans that were repealed even after the final verdict. And I think there was Thomas Cooper and Walter Purdy, and they were sentenced to death, and obviously they appealed it, and after the failure of the final appeals, they were reprieved and pardoned, and they did a few years in prison and they got out. Well, John Amory, there were probably good grounds for an appeal, because if you look at his early life, he does appear to have had some sort of personality disorder or mental instability. So there were big grounds for an appeal in terms of John Amory and his case. But what happened was the permanent secretary of the Home Office, Frank Newsom, he wrote when he was discussing this case, there is the further consideration of the effect of a reprieve on public opinion. Capital punishment in this country is tolerated as a deterrent because the man in the street believes the law is administered without fear or favour. If Amory were to be reprieved, it would be difficult to convince the ordinary man in the street that Amory had not received exceptional and privileged treatment. Now, Amory's dad was a cabinet minister, and there is the permanent secretary to the Home Secretary saying, if Amory doesn't hang, people will think he didn't hang, he got a pardon because his dad was a cabinet minister. So those two other guys were reprieved, and Amory, with his mental instability, probably had good grounds for a reprieve and a pardon, and he didn't get it. And it was because of his privileged background. So, you know, we always think privilege confers advantage, and it doesn't. And I think this is what it's done in this case. And I mean, a lot of Britain is in many ways the home of the class system. And Dr. Dutton, the jolly heretic, he's looked at this and he said class is 0.7 heritable. I mean, someone like myself, my parents were average intelligence, average working people. I'm going to be the same. It's very rare to get someone whose dad repairs TVs ending up a doctor. Whereas someone whose dad was a doctor, it's probably more common that they're going to end up a doctor. But in terms of the disadvantage, I think we can also see this with Mark and the blindness it's given him. And he thinks, if I can recreate that middle class world that I sacrificed, to his credit, in nationalism, I can sell it. I can make it appeal to the normie masses. Now, what he's got to realise, and what his privilege in terms of his middle class background is blinding him to, is the fact the core of nationalism, whether we like it or not, will always mainly be working class. Now, we will have posh people come to us. I mean, in terms of posh people, I always think of Gregory Lilder de Frost in traditional Britain. He's got a voice straight out of Brideshead Revisited. And I remember I used the word cool once to him. I said, wouldn't something be cool? He goes, yes, wouldn't that be cool? And you're like, oh God. But this is the thing. Gregory stands out because it is rare to have someone that posh involved in hardcore nationalism. And credit to Gregory, and credit to any other upper and middle class person who's prepared to come and join us. Obviously, they should be welcomed. But the majority of the middle class and upper class people, because they have got more to lose socially and financially, they will remain what David Cameron always termed the closet racists in UKIP. They might agree with us in their heart of hearts, but they're not prepared to argue it openly. They're not prepared to support us openly. They're not prepared to campaign for us openly. So they're of limited use to us. So, yeah, in terms of PA, Mark's got to accept, you want to build a mass movement, the majority of the people coming along will be working class, and that applies particularly to the people who are prepared to campaign openly and dox themselves, in the words of Nick, out on the street. And a lot of your little meme warriors, they tend to be the more sort of middle class type ones, but they're the ones who are scared to show their face. And I mean, on the Patriotic talk show, there was a nice guy who talked. He'd been to one of Mark's camps, and he had some beers by his van at 1 a.m. because he looked upon it as a holiday, and he wasn't hassling anyone or trying to wake anyone up. And one of Mark's little meme warriors suddenly appeared there in his underpants, shouting at him that he should get to bed and he was disturbing people. And rather than just have a row there and then and forget about it, the next morning this guy went to Mark like a little prefect telling the teacher. And it was the same, my story I quoted earlier with the dog. And this is very much these guys, the hardcore LARPers, the anonymous avatar laptop warriors. They might have a Waffen SS logo, but they won't be the core of the movement. They won't be prepared often to go out on the street. And I can attest to this. I mean, a good example of this is the absolute state of Britain. And Ralph Wright reaction, he said it's middle class boys Nazi LARPing. And he calls them the absolute state of bricking it, because they're about as enthusiastic in their Nazi LARPing as they are terrified of anyone finding out who they are. I mean, particularly Euro. I mean, I met Euro and Nativist at a local PA meet, and obviously if I'd found out their real name or who they were, I wouldn't say on here because I wouldn't do that. But I mean, Nativist, he tried, when I criticised Hitler's invasion of Russia, he tried to tell me Hitler was liberating Russia for the Russians, which was nonsense, because the way the Nazis acted in Russia, I mean, for a start, they starved 3 million Russian prisoners of war to death, and they were trying to take Russia away from the Russians, which was totally wrong, because every nation has a right to their homeland. And for him to make this absurd argument to me, but at the same time, he wouldn't be prepared to say it in public. And next to me was Nativist, and I listened to the absolute state of Britain because occasionally it's amusing. It was better when Toller was on it. You know, whatever his faults in terms of his girlfriend, it was better when he was on it. And I recognised Nativist's voice, and I said to him, "You're on the absolute state of Britain, aren't you?" And rather than saying, "Yes, it's me, I'm the big bad Nazi LARPer nationalist," he sort of looked down at the ground and he goes, I might be. And I was like, well, you're the big bad Nazi LARPer. Should be, yes, it's me. I'm Nativist from the absolute state of Britain. Shouldn't be, it might be me. Please don't dox me. You know, I mean, this shouldn't be how, particularly amongst other nationalists. I mean, I remember at traditional Britain, at the BNP, at Swinton Circle, at the Conservative Democratic Alliance, back in the day, pre-internet era, we all called each other by our real names. We didn't need to hide behind, I'm Euro, I'm Waffen SS 36 or whatever. And so Mark needs to accept the core of the movement will be working class, and that is where the core of the contribution and the mass movement will come from. And yes, let's welcome these middle class lads, and yes, let's respect if people do need to stay anonymous, but anyone who has got a really, really big fear of being doxed, they should really be taking a back seat, because if they're doing shows on the internet, sooner or later someone will recognise their voice. I mean, it happened in my case. I had a Facebook account outside work under a false name. Someone found me, and it happens. And the bigger you get, the more people hear you, the more chance there is of it happening. So, your fear of doxing can't be bigger than your belief and your conviction in your principles. And if that day comes when you have to say, yes, it's me, yes, I believe those things, you can't be hiding away. You have to be prepared to stand up and say, yes, it's me. And if people want to turn their backs on me, they were never my real friends anyway, and I don't care. So that's the third core thing, that Mark, don't be blinded by your privilege. See the core of the movement for what it is, for its working class roots. Now, the root of this issue, again, I come back to, mate, the core of this problem is, I think, Mark's lack of normie work experience. And I said this on my YPA video, his failing job. If you've had years of working alongside the normie drones, you've had years of keeping your mouth shut at work, you realise how far we can take people in terms of nationalist ideas. You realise the blocks that are in their mind. You realise it's a waste of time, and it scares people off trying to rehabilitate dead regimes. And this is what Mark needs. And I think he worked full time for the BNP. He seems to have had some sort of PR type job that maybe his dad got him or something, or self-employment, and he's now working full time for PA. Now, I worked, as I said, a teacher, a postman, prison officer, policeman. I've worked amongst the normie drones. I've had to keep my mouth shut. I've listened to the conversations, and you see how things are and how the normie mindset is. And also, in terms of work and jobs you do, you get a sense of achievement and a sense of confidence from it. I mean, I don't know if you see up there on the wall, there's up there above the picture of good old Enoch Powell, there is my prison service graduation class photo, and there's the picture of me on the parade ground at Hendon with my Uncle Alan. And my mum went as well. My dad was sadly dead by this point. And, obviously I took a great pride in that, because I'd passed the 3 exams at 70% on law. I'd learnt 30 pages of notes on the law by heart. I'd had CS spray sprayed in my face. I'd done an OST course twice, because I had an instructor who loved failing someone, and they're not going to fail any of the 5-foot women, so they'll always fail the white heterosexual man. And where you have to hold your hand out, and they pull you down with handcuffs on, which hurt, and you have to do a handcuff test and a baton test, and there's all these tests and exams you have to pass, and you take pride in it, and it's something you've achieved, and it gives you a confidence. And all the jobs I've done, I mean, being a postman, I'd have old people on my round, like this old guy Horace. I even went to his funeral. I used to go in, chat to him, see how he was. He lived to he was about 98. And you take pride in it. And not only does the job give you money, the job gives you confidence. And I think a political leader, if they've got work experience, they'll have that confidence that they'll be able to work with people they disagree with or dislike, and even to see that occasionally someone you don't like is a valid contribution, and you may not like them personally, but they're worth having around because they're contributing. And I sense also, I mean, I can't know this, but I sense also in a way this is what did for the BNP. And I mean, part of the problem was that in 2010, in the general election, they overextended themselves, like the Sixth Army at Stalingrad. And they try, I mean, I've got a piano teacher here, Nancy, this Cuban lady, and one of her sayings is, don't try and run before you can walk. Get the basics, the technique right first. And the BNP in 2010, it tried to run before it could walk. And it put up too many candidates, lost a load of deposits, a load of money. Now, it could have gone on and just put that behind it and carried on. But after 2010, a lot of infighting broke out. And part of this was because Nick, for all his skills as a good speaker and a good talker and help, inspiring an audience and charisma, he did have a slight insecurity. And this slight insecurity meant that he was always he liked to have all the levers of power in his hands. And this is why Nick, he seemed to prefer sycophants like Richard Barnbrook, who was on the London Assembly, and Clive Jefferson, to talent like Mark Collett, who is, whatever his faults, a talented guy, and Jonathan Bowden, the oratorical genius. And what happened after 2010, Nick had appointed all these sycophants because he liked to have his hands on the levers of power. And then when things were bad, because they were out for the main chance, his own sycophants turned around and stabbed him in the back. Now, if he'd have appointed talented, clever, charismatic people under him, they might have been loyal to him because they'd have been more secure, more confident, but he didn't. And looking at Nick's past, now Nick, he was a very clever guy. He went to Cambridge in the 70s when very few people went there. Now, after he came out of Cambridge, I think a law firm offered him a job. And this was back in the 70s. It wasn't like, oh, if you've been anywhere near nationalism, we won't touch you. They just said, if you want to come and work with us, you've got to give up this involvement in terms of leading roles in the National Front. And Nick turned it down. And I think he went from one thing to another, and he was bankrupt, and he always just sort of did little tiny jobs or worked in politics, and he never seemed to have any big career or big job. And it's a shame in a way, because a very clever guy, he could have got a very good job, particularly back then when there were more opportunities. And if he'd have done a really good job, it would have given him this confidence and this security that when it came to making appointments below him in the BNP, he would have picked the talented people and relied more on the talented people like Mark Collett, like Jonathan Bowden, instead of the sycophants and the corrupt like Jefferson and Richard Barnbrook out for the main chance. I mean, we all know about the controversy with Jefferson and the wills, and I'm not high enough in the leadership to know what is going on there, but a lot of members are very unhappy with the way money is being managed there. I don't know, I can't say 100% where there's corruption, but I know a lot of people are unhappy at the way Clive Jefferson was managing those wills and those bequests. And in terms of Richard Barnbrook, for me personally, it's a particular bitter pill, because back in 2008, he got on the London Assembly. Well, back then, I was a postman, and I'd get up 5 days a week at 5 a.m. And on Sundays, I'd get up, my day off, I'd get up for about 6-7 weeks, and I'd go out leafleting to get Richard Barnbrook on that London Assembly for 2 hours, 6:30 till 8:30 Sunday morning. Wandering all around my town, Biggin Hill. And my town, Biggin Hill, my friend Steve, the decorator, he said to me, they actually asked the local leadership, how many people have we got in Biggin Hill? And he said, it's just Gus out there. And because I think Biggin Hill in those 2008 London Assembly elections wasn't on me. There was a great leaflet. I was really impressed with it. We got a really high vote in Biggin Hill. And then Richard Barnbrook, he got on that London Assembly, and it was a £60,000 a year job. Then he argued with Nick. Now what he could have done then, he left the BNP. He could have resigned his seat without a by-election and given his seat to his number 2, Eddie Butler, because he was elected under the BNP banner. So he could have said, right, I've argued with Nick, I don't want to be in the BNP anymore. Eddie Butler, here's my seat. I'm going. But he didn't do that. He clung on as an independent, and we never got near that London Assembly again. And that means all the hard work that me and other people had put in, free of charge, off our own backs, to get him there, and he just sat there for the money. And sadly, Nick, he relied on people like this. And Nick, he's not in it for the money. Nick is a man of conviction. But it was this insecurity about not having a career, not having that normie job, that led, I would think, for him to rely on the grifters and the corrupt rather than on the talent and the wise. And I'd say, just me myself, speaking to any youngster, I mean, in terms of university, I'd say don't go unless you want to be something like a lawyer or a doctor, because I was quite depressed and lonely at university. Never, particularly, I mean, I was the last year to get university free of charge, 1997. But any youngster today, I would say, don't go. It's not worth going. And particularly now, you end up with 20,000 or 30,000 of debt. But I'd say, go out, get yourself a job, whatever it is, go in the army for a few years or whatever job it is. You will get confidence and you'll get a sense of achievement from that job, even if it's something really mundane or something really lowly. You will still get a sense of achievement from it, and even if it is really lowly, it will lead on to other better jobs. And in terms of young lads, it's very important because the women notice it too. I mean, I can recall another apocryphal story. I was in the post office and there was this guy, and he had a high achieving wife, and he went part-time at the post office. And I remember him saying to me, his name was Will, he told me, I want to be a house husband, I don't want to go to work, I just want to look after my baby daughter at home. And my wife, she's going so well with her career, she's got this stellar career in the city. I just sit at home looking after the baby, take the baby to do the school run and live off my wife, Natalie. Well, didn't work out that way, because a year later, Natalie left him for the alpha male in her office. So, work is very important, and you will find men who avoid work, it won't only destroy their confidence, it will have bad consequence in their life. And she was married to this guy, and she knew he wanted to be a house husband, and in the end, it didn't attract her. And this poor mate of mine, I don't see him now, but I was friends with him then, but he must have had his confidence blown by that. So I would always say work is very important in terms of the confidence it will give you, and the attractiveness it will give a young man in terms of women and all the rest of it. And I would say nationalism, people need to have these normie jobs. You need to just go to a normie job, keep your mouth shut, keep your head down for a few years, and that will build your confidence and your abilities in dealing with people. And then when you come on to nationalism, you'll have more of a contribution and more charisma and more good argument, more skills in terms of talking to people to contribute. And this is particularly so for leaders. And I still see Mark's issue that he thinks it's just about image and not ideas. It's not about image and a middle class sheen. Nationalism is about selling ideas. And if Mark had had more normie work experience, he would see that. And if Nick had done that legal career, if just for 5 or 6 years, he'd have had a greater confidence, and he wouldn't have felt threatened by people below him in the BNP structure who had talent. He'd have embraced that talent. So that's all I've got to say. And the Eastenders nationalism continues, and hopefully we can move on past this and we can unite. But as I say, flexibility is required. And from what I can see, the boys at Patriotic Talk, they're being flexible, and I would say it's the PA leadership who need to be flexible. And it doesn't matter if one person or 100 people or 1,000 people view this. I feel passionately about this and about the movement, and that's why I had to feel I had to have my say on it. So I thank whoever's taken the time to watch and listen to my ramblings on, and I'd urge you, whether you agree with me 100% or not, to consider and think on the points I've made. Thank you, good night, and cheers.